The broadcast spread across the galaxy like a blade slicing through silence, cutting into every screen, every station, every corner of known space. It showed no battles, no fights, no survivors. Just the cold remains of what used to be a thriving Terran colony. A place once filled with families, laughter, children running through domed cities, fields stretching under artificial skies. Now it was nothing but ash and dust, a silent graveyard orbiting a star. Over 1 billion lives erased in a single night. Alien fleets called it an unfortunate accident. The Galactic Council called it a misunderstanding. Their statement was polished and calm, as if an apology could cover the blood of 1 billion souls. But on Earth, in the cold dark below Europa's ice, inside the Terran Command Center, the reaction was nothing like theirs. Every wall of the underground facility glowed with red light. Alarm beacons flashed softly, but there were no blaring sirens, no loud shouting. Just a silence so deep it made the air feel heavy. Rows of officers stood frozen before giant screens showing the ruins of the colony. You could see broken ships drifting in orbit like dying stars. Cities carved into the planet's crust had been turned into craters. The last transmission from the colony had lasted less than 10 seconds. It was not a call for help. It was the sound of static. Everything after that was nothing. In the center of the command room stood Admiral Rourke, his hands folded tightly behind his back. His jaw was locked, his eyes fixed on the larger screen where the Council's statement repeated on a loop. They spoke in smooth, empty words. They talked about cooperation, forgiveness, and future peace. Each word felt like acid in the air. Around him, officers clenched their fists but didn't speak. They didn't need to. Every person in that room understood what this moment meant. Humanity had seen this before. Not from aliens. From itself. Centuries ago, when war tore through its own homeworld, when cities burned and the strong crushed the weak. Back then, humanity had made a promise. A quiet promise that echoed through its bloodline. Never again. No more standing by. No more pretending. No more mercy for those who slaughter the innocent. On one of the side screens, the faces of the council delegates filled the room. Alien diplomats bowed their heads with fake sorrow, their eyes dry, their hands folded with the kind of calm that only comes when guilt is buried under arrogance. One of them said, "We deeply regret the loss of human life, but warships were not meant to target civilians." Another added, "We hope for human understanding. Retaliation will not bring anyone back." In some parts of the galaxy, those words might have worked. But not here. Not with Earth. In the far back of the room, a young communications officer lowered her eyes as she replayed the last visuals from the colony. She saw the flash of orbital strikes, the walls crumbling, the way light consumed everything. She pressed her lips together so hard they turned white. She wanted to scream. But no one screamed here. Screaming belonged to the weak. Humanity had learned to stay quiet when the world tried to break it. That silence was not surrender. It was the space before something far worse. Deep in the command center, beneath layers of reinforced metal and ice, ancient systems hummed to life. Codes that hadn't been touched in over a century were unlocked. Sealed servers opened like the cracking of old bones. Orders that had been written in another age, by people who had already survived the worst, were pulled from the shadows. They were not orders for diplomacy. They were not designed for debate. These were orders for war. Above the command room, in the black skies over Europa, Terran defense satellites rotated with quiet precision. Their sensors focused on deep space. For years, they had slept. But now, one by one, their red indicators lit up. Entire fleet movements began shifting like the slow roll of thunderclouds. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but a storm had already started moving. On Earth itself, thousands of kilometers away from the icy moon, entire cities went dark for a moment. Not because of panic, because that was how it started. Streets that had been filled with the constant hum of light and noise grew still. Massive underground silos powered on, sealed black ships began sliding out of their cradles, and hidden factories deep beneath the crust rumbled to life. Ordinary civilians did not march in anger. They stood in silence, their faces hard, their hands clenched. Every Terran understood without needing to be told. Genocide was not an accident. It was a declaration. The Council expected tears, speeches, and protests. They believed humanity would come to the negotiation table, demanding justice and pleading for answers. They thought humans would act like victims. They forgot what happens when humanity stops pretending to be civilized. Admiral Rourke finally turned from the screen. His voice was quiet when he spoke, but the sound carried through the room like a blade sliding from its sheath. Seal the channels. His officers moved instantly, cutting the connection to the Council broadcast. The smiling faces of the alien diplomats vanished from every screen, replaced by silent star maps glowing in red. The galaxy was now divided into two sides, those who stood with humanity and those who would learn why they shouldn't stand against it. A single command key was inserted into the console in front of him. The metal clicked softly. Above the command table, a holographic projection flickered to life, showing the erased colony surrounded by enemy signatures. No human ships had been there to fight. No one had been prepared. But this time, humanity would make sure the galaxy never forgot what it meant to cross that line. No one in the room cheered. No one spoke words of revenge. They didn't need to. Their silence was louder than any scream. It spread across the room like the weight of a coming storm, and every heartbeat carried the same unspoken truth. This was not going to be forgiven. This was going to be answered. Far above, beyond the orbit of Europa, in the empty darkness between the stars, the first Terran fleets stirred like a predator waking from hibernation. Engines that had been cold for too long began to burn blue. Warships shifted position. Satellites changed course. Humanity wasn't reacting out of rage. It was doing what it had always done when someone tried to destroy it. It was preparing to end the threat. The galaxy might have called it an accident. The Council might have called it regrettable. But for humanity, this was something far simpler. This was war. And the storm that was rising would make sure every empire that watched in silence would remember this moment forever. Across the galaxy, the aftermath of the broadcast settled like ash after a fire. Words of apology echoed in hollow tones from the Council's capital, carried across hundreds of star systems, repeated by governments that didn't mean them. It was the kind of tragedy they had learned to bury in diplomatic language. To them, this was another incident that would fade with time. But humanity was different. Earth didn't let things like this fade. It carried them like scars burned into its soul. On Earth itself, the great cities went quiet. Screens flickered, repeating the same message. Over 1 billion civilians on the Terran colony of Novus had been wiped out in a single night. No distress signals, no survivors, nothing left but dust. At first, the world stood still. There were no protests, no angry mobs. Just silence. That silence stretched across continents like a dark tide. In orbit, station lights dimmed. On Luna, factories powered down in unison. Even the sprawling metropolises fell under an eerie quiet. On the steps of the Terran assembly, the flag of Novus was raised one last time. It didn't flutter in the wind. It hung heavy and still, like the weight of the dead it represented. People stood for hours, watching it in silence. No speeches were made. No promises of justice were given. Humanity had moved past words a long time ago. Words didn't protect children. Words didn't stop fleets. Actions did. In the frozen heart of Antarctica, where the Terran Strategic Command was buried beneath layers of ice, the real work began. Massive blast doors opened slowly, groaning as if they had been asleep for decades. Inside, ancient war computers lit up one by one, their screens glowing a sharp crimson. For generations, they had been silent, hidden beneath treaties and agreements that humanity had signed but never trusted. Deep below the surface, a network older than the Galactic Council itself hummed to life. No one outside Earth had ever seen these systems. No one even knew they existed. A voice echoed through the war room. Calm, cold, controlled. Begin Omega Protocol. It was a code that had only ever existed in whispers, passed through the highest levels of command. Officers moved without hesitation. They didn't ask questions. They didn't debate morality. Every person in that room knew what genocide meant. Every soldier knew what came next. In orbit above Mars, hidden shipyards that had been cloaked for decades started opening their massive hangars. Ships that were only rumors to alien intelligence slipped out of their docks like shadows unfolding in the night. They bore no markings, no flags, no bright lights. They were black, sharp, angular, silent. Warships built not to be seen but to strike. Across the Terran colonies, similar hangars opened, one after another, like stars igniting in reverse. Civilian ships vanished from the trade lanes overnight. Every freighter, every transport, every mining vessel that belonged to the Terran Federation disappeared from public routes. The galaxy noticed. Alien merchants whispered nervously in orbital stations. Officials sent questions to the Council. But there were no answers. Earth had gone quiet. And everyone who knew human history understood that silence was not peace. It was the sound that came before something far worse. In the depths of the Terran intelligence network, data streams shifted direction. Satellite relays changed hands. Surveillance stations hidden inside asteroid belts began transmitting information at full capacity. Every alien fleet that had stood near Terran borders was mapped and marked. Every trade lane that carried military supplies to the enemy was tagged. Every weakness was found and catalogued. The work was efficient, quiet, and absolute. Meanwhile, on the Council's capital world, alien leaders congratulated themselves for controlling the narrative. They issued apologies, offered compensation, held carefully staged memorials to look merciful. It was a mistake, they said. We will make sure this never happens again. They expected Earth to send diplomats, to demand justice in negotiations, to play their game. But no delegation came. No requests for talks. No sign of forgiveness. Back in Antarctica, beneath that frozen fortress, the main war table glowed as the map of the galaxy shifted. Red markers lit up where the enemy's supply lines stretched thin. Blue Terran markers slowly began to appear at the edges of those lines. Humanity was not rushing. It was watching, waiting, closing its fist around the Council's fleets before they even realized they were trapped. On Europa, Admiral Rourke stood in the observation room, watching as black fleet carriers slowly emerged from hangars, engines burning a deep blue against the stars. One of his officers approached him, her voice low, steady. "Do we issue the warning?" Rourke shook his head slowly. "No," he replied. "They didn't warn us before they slaughtered our people. We don't owe them anything." The officer nodded and walked away. She didn't need to ask what came next. The Terran military didn't need fiery speeches. They had discipline, silence, and a memory that stretched far longer than any alien empire could imagine. Humanity was slow to anger. But once it crossed that line, it never stopped. In the orbital rings around Earth, hundreds of civilian volunteers lined up to enlist. They weren't forced. They didn't need to be. People who had lost everything on Novus didn't need convincing. Families who had grown up hearing about old wars knew what to do. The Council thought humanity would bow its head, that it would forgive like it always had before. But they didn't understand the difference between forgiveness and tolerance. Genocide was a line even time could not erase. Throughout Council-controlled space, alien commanders started to notice the quiet. Terran communication channels, normally filled with chatter, had gone completely dark. Patrol fleets disappeared from scanners. Merchant convoys rerouted. It was as if humanity had turned into a shadow. One alien admiral, an old war veteran, whispered to his second-in-command, "This isn't silence. This is the sound of their teeth baring." Back in Terran command, an operator stared at the glowing map of the stars. Every Terran ship was moving now. Not fast, not loud, but together, in perfect coordination. She had been trained for years for this day, just like her parents had been trained before her. Her voice shook only slightly as she reported, "All fleets are mobilizing. Black Fleet is at 70% operational capacity. They'll be ready to strike in less than a week." Admiral Rourke didn't respond immediately. He simply watched the map, watched the way Terran strength was wrapping around the Council like a storm cloud creeping over a horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold. Let them keep talking about forgiveness. We'll show them what it costs to cross us. Far away, in distant star systems, alien leaders still believed humanity could be contained with apologies. They believed the Terrans would wait for justice. They didn't understand. Justice was not coming. Retribution was. And it would not knock on their doors. It would break them open without warning. The last embers of Novus still drifted in space. An entire world turned into dust. Humanity hadn't forgotten. It never would. And now, the storm was moving. Quietly. Unstoppable. Just like it always had. In the cold darkness beyond the Terran border, the first alien fleets began to move. They flew like predators through empty space, engines burning bright, confident and loud. Council commanders spoke with arrogance over open channels, certain that humanity's silence was weakness. They believed this was the moment Earth would either bend its knees or break entirely. Their ships advanced in tight formations, weapons charged, scanners searching for signs of Terran defenses. But what they didn't know was that they weren't the hunters. They were already inside the trap. In the blackness between stars, Terran ships were already there. They had been there long before the alien fleets even left their docks. The Black Fleet, the part of humanity's navy no alien had ever truly seen, was watching. These ships weren't built to shine. They weren't built to impress or inspire. They were built to end wars before they began. Their hulls were invisible to standard scanners. Their engines emitted no heat signatures. To alien eyes, the void around them was empty. But inside those ships, Terran crews were calm and focused, their faces lit by the dim glow of tactical screens. On the bridge of the Iron Veil, Admiral Rourke stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the massive holographic projection of enemy movements. Red markers bled slowly into Terran space, overconfident and unaware. His officers spoke in soft, controlled voices, feeding him data. Every alien ship was tracked in real time. Their jump points, their formations, their blind spots. They thought they were entering quiet, unprotected space. In reality, they were walking into a battlefield that humanity had built decades ago. Phase 1, Rourke said quietly. Just 2 words, and the silence of the Black Fleet shifted. Across hundreds of hidden warships, power systems came online without a sound. Massive railgun barrels turned like predators, tilting their heads toward prey. Missile bays opened with mechanical precision. Hunter drones detached from their carriers and began slipping through the void like knives made of shadow. On the alien flagship, the Admiral leaned forward in his chair, narrowing his reptilian eyes at the flickering readings on his sensor screens. "What's that interference?" he growled. His crew tapped frantically at their controls. "Could be dust clouds, sir," one officer said. Another added, "Maybe stray signals from their old satellites." But deep down, even the veterans among them felt something cold crawl down their spines. The silence was too thick, too perfect. And then, the lights on their control boards flickered. For a moment, every screen showed static. Communications dropped to nothing. Their networks were jammed. Not partially, completely. The alien admiral shot up from his chair. "Reroute signals. Find the source." But there was no source. The Terrans had cut through their entire communication web like a blade through silk. That was when the first ship disappeared. No explosion. No sound. Just gone. On the tactical display, it blinked out like someone erasing a mark on a board. Seconds later, 2 more followed. "We've lost contact with Vanguard units," shouted one alien officer. "What's happening out there?" The answer came in the form of a silent flash. A black Terran warship uncloaked for less than a second, fired a single railgun slug, and vanished again. The slug tore through the alien destroyer like paper, splitting it in 2 without even triggering its shields. In the alien flagship, panic began to spread like fire through dry wood. All across the front, the Black Fleet struck at once. Terran warships moved like shadows between stars, hitting critical targets and then disappearing before the aliens could respond. Enemy comrades, fuel depots, and command cruisers vanished into cold silence one after another. They fired with precision, 1 shot, 1 kill. Entire formations were cut down without a single Terran casualty. Alien captains shouted orders. Form a line. Raise shields. Turn the fleet. But their commands couldn't reach half their ships. Their networks were shredded, their formations broken, and their confidence crushed in seconds. The silence they had mocked was now pressing down on them like a weight they couldn't fight against. On one alien cruiser, a young officer stared at the tactical display with wide, terrified eyes. Hundreds of red dots representing their ships were flickering, disappearing, or spinning out of control. "Where are they?" he whispered. His captain's voice cracked as he barked back, "Everywhere and nowhere." In the council chamber light years away, the first reports reached the ambassadors. Fleets were vanishing. Ships were going dark. "Impossible," one alien delegate whispered. "They can't have that kind of reach. They can't." But the humans didn't need to prove anything. They weren't trying to impress. They were making a statement in the only language they trusted: results. Back on the Iron Veil, Admiral Rourke watched in silence as alien formations crumbled. His officers reported each kill with quiet precision. Fleet 3 disabled. Fleet 7 fractured. Command group offline. His jaw tightened. There was no pride in his voice. Only resolve. Phase 2, he said. That was when the Black Fleet revealed itself fully. Dozens of Terran dreadnoughts powered up their engines at once, their blue thrusters flaring against the black. To the alien ships still alive, it looked like the darkness itself was opening its jaws. Massive ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons aimed like 1,000 spears pointed at a cornered animal. The alien admiral tried to retreat. "Plot hyperspace jumps," he shouted. But the hyperspace lanes were already sealed. Terran interdiction fields locked the entire fleet inside a steel cage. They had nowhere to run. "Open fire," Rourke said. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. Railguns lit up the void with streaks of blue fire. Missile salvos cut through what was left of the alien defenses. Shields collapsed like wet paper. Ships exploded in silence, their hulls breaking apart into glowing fragments. In minutes, entire enemy fleets were reduced to drifting metal and frozen bodies. In the council chamber, panic erupted. "Pull them back," someone shouted. "Negotiate," another cried. But it was too late for negotiation. Terran vengeance had already been set in motion, and it did not stop until the enemy was broken. One alien captain managed to send a final message before his ship went dark. His voice was trembling, filled with disbelief. "We thought they were civilized," he whispered, "but they are something else." His last transmission ended in static. Back in the command room on Europa, the Terran officers stared at their screens. Fleet after fleet of enemy ships blinked out of existence. The galaxy had watched 1 billion humans die in silence, expecting Earth to kneel. Instead, Earth had shown them its true face, not in rage, not in noise, but in cold, surgical retribution. And in the cold space between the stars, the message was clear: humanity didn't forget. Humanity didn't forgive. And when it answered, it did so like a storm, quiet, relentless, and absolute. The wreckage of the council fleets drifted through the void like silent ghosts, twisted hulls slowly turning in the cold darkness. Beacons that once glowed with proud insignias were now just shards of melted metal, blinking weakly as they died. The great armadas that had entered Terran space with laughter and arrogance were gone. They had been erased so cleanly that their disappearance didn't even sound like war. It felt like the stars themselves had swallowed them whole. In the council chamber, across distant light years, that silence began to spread. And with it came fear. On the surface of Earth, the news was not broadcast with trumpets or celebration. There were no cheering crowds, no roaring parades. Humanity did not celebrate vengeance. Humanity remembered. Across the cities, the same stillness continued. Memorial walls filled with the names of the lost colony flickered like constellations in the night. People stood in front of them, not speaking, not crying. They simply waited. Everyone knew this was only the beginning. Deep beneath the frozen layers of Europa, inside the Terran command bunker, Admiral Rourke stood at the center of the war table. The star map stretched across the entire galaxy, glowing softly in the dim light. Red markers represented Council-controlled territories, but they were shrinking, sector by sector, world by world. Terran blue markers were spreading outward, not like a chaotic storm, but like a carefully drawn blade, cutting through arteries with surgical precision. No one in that room had to be told what came next. The Council had started something they could no longer control. All fleets report combat readiness, an officer said, his voice low but steady. Black Fleet is rearming. Stealth wings are in position. Omega strike teams are awaiting authorization. Rourke gave a slight nod. There was no speech, no grand announcement. The Terran military didn't need fire to burn. They were already an inferno wrapped in silence. In Council space, the panic was no longer hidden. Alien leaders shouted in their private war rooms, their voices echoing off stone walls and metal floors. How did they strike that fast? Why didn't we detect their fleets? Where are the reinforcements? But no answer came. The truth was too bitter for them to admit. They had underestimated humanity completely. They thought Terrans were soft. They thought treaties had made them weak. They thought they could burn a colony and get away with it. They were wrong. Entire communication relays along the border started going dark. Council fleets that had been sent to reinforce the front lines vanished without sending a single distress signal. Colonies that once flew the Council flag suddenly found themselves without protection. Terran intelligence had torn out the heart of their supply chains in a single night. Fuel depots exploded before the enemy even arrived. Strategic hyperlanes were blocked by invisible interdiction fields. Entire sectors of space were being isolated and choked. On one border world, a proud military hub once boasting of its invincibility, alarm sirens screamed for the first time in centuries. Civilians flooded the streets, looking up at the sky. There was nothing there at first. Just stars. But then the stars began to move. Black ships emerged slowly from the darkness, engines glowing faint blue, their silhouettes sharp as blades. There was no broadcast, no declaration of war, just silence and the distant hum of engines. The alien defense minister screamed into the comms, "Activate planetary shields." But the command never reached the ground batteries. Terran infiltration teams had already taken control of the network hours earlier. A single pulse from orbit shut down their defenses like snuffing out a candle. Then came the sound, the deep, low hum of Terran orbital cannons charging. In one precise strike, the shield generators were vaporized. No civilian structures were hit. No random bombing. Just cold, exact destruction. It was as if the humans were saying, "We know where your heart is, and we can crush it whenever we choose." In the Council's central command, alien admirals tried to rally. Their fleets were scattered, their lines broken. "We must retaliate," one barked. But another whispered what no one else wanted to say. "Retaliate with what? They've already cut our legs." The fear in that room was raw. They had always believed the humans were dangerous, but controlled, contained. Now they understood the truth. Humanity had simply been waiting. Back in Terran Command, Admiral Rourke watched a holographic projection of that border world surrendering. The enemy governor appeared on the feed, shaking, his scaled hands raised. His voice cracked, "We surrender to Earth's authority. Please, no further strikes." Rourke didn't reply. He simply ended the transmission. Terran fleets moved onward. They did not conquer territory with occupation. They dismantled enemy power step by step. They removed the Council's grip over the galaxy without needing to plant a single flag. People on alien worlds began to whisper. Not of hatred, not of rebellion, but of fear and something close to respect. The humans didn't act like conquerors. They acted like judges. On a distant mining moon, an alien commander looked out at the black horizon, where Terran ships hovered silently like executioners. "We thought they'd beg for justice," he whispered to his second-in-command. Instead, they became justice. Meanwhile, the Council convened emergency meetings one after another. The Chancellor shouted over the chaos, "They want something. They must want something." But deep down, Everyone in that room knew the truth. Humanity didn't want their land. Humanity didn't want their power. Humanity wanted one thing: revenge so precise it would live in galactic memory forever. At the edges of Council space, resistance started to crumble without a single Terran shot. Fleets surrendered before contact. Colonies opened their ports before orbit was even breached. One world sent out a transmission that echoed across hundreds of systems: "We do not fight Earth. We do not stand with the Council. We surrender." That message spread like wildfire. Admiral Rourke stood with his hands on the edge of the war table, his voice barely above a whisper. "They thought our silence was weakness," he said. "They never understood what silence means to us." The officers around him said nothing. They didn't need to. Humanity had always spoken loudest in the moments before the storm broke. Across the stars, the Council's empire fractured. Allies pulled away, refusing to be next. Traders rerouted their ships to avoid Terran patrol zones. Old enemies of the Council sent quiet offers of neutrality to Earth, hoping to avoid the fury they'd just witnessed. Humanity hadn't asked for allies, but power always attracts gravity. In orbit above the surrendered border world, the Black Fleet hovered like a shadow over the planet. No bombings. No occupation. Just the cold reminder that Earth could destroy everything if it chose to. In that silence, the galaxy finally began to understand the truth. This wasn't a war for conquest. This wasn't about planets or trade routes. This was the moment humanity showed its true face, not the diplomats who smiled at the Council, not the explorers who built colonies. This was the face that was born from centuries of surviving its own darkness. The galaxy had made the fatal mistake of thinking humanity had become soft. But humanity had not changed. It had only been waiting, watching. And when the storm finally came, it didn't roar. It whispered, and the universe broke under its breath. The Council's once unshakable power began to rot from the inside like a tree eaten hollow by unseen fire. Fleets that had once stretched across the stars were now nothing more than names on old lists, fragments of signal logs, and broken hulls drifting through the void. The galaxy that had laughed at Earth's fury now whispered about it in dark corners. No one wanted to speak too loudly. Even words felt dangerous now. The humans didn't bark threats. They didn't make declarations. They just moved, and when they moved, empires fell. In Council space, panic had taken root like a disease. Governors who once swore loyalty to the Council now locked their doors and quietly sent encrypted messages begging for mercy. Trade lords rerouted their convoys, hoping to keep their wealth hidden from Terran eyes. But the truth was, nothing was hidden. Terran intelligence networks had already mapped everything: every fuel line, every relay, every fleet depot. For decades, humanity had been listening while pretending to be small. Now, that patience was paying back in fire and silence. On the Council's capital world, the Chancellor stood in the Grand War Chamber staring at a map that looked nothing like the one he'd seen weeks earlier. Once, Council Red had stretched proudly across entire sectors. Now, those same regions were either grey with surrender or glowing blue with Terran control. Fleets had vanished. Allies had fled. Some planets had switched sides without firing a single shot. His hands trembled as he whispered to his advisors. How did they do this so fast? No one answered him. They were too busy trying to hide their own fear. It wasn't just the speed of the Terran advance that broke them. It was the method. Humanity didn't waste resources in massive invasions. It didn't smash planets into rubble for glory. It struck like a scalpel, cutting nerve centers, isolating enemy worlds, forcing leaders to kneel without ever firing on their civilians. Terran war was clean, cold, and absolute. On the orbital perimeter of an industrial council world, alarms blared. Their defense grid, built over centuries and powered by a planetary core, was considered unbreakable. But when the Terran fleet arrived, no battle followed. One EMP burst from orbit. One precise cyber attack. In less than 3 minutes, their entire defense network fell silent. Massive battleships hung in the sky like dark mountains. No shots fired. No demands made. And yet everyone on the surface understood exactly what would happen if they resisted. In underground shelters, alien officials argued frantically, screaming at each other to act, to send messages, to fight. But over their shouting came a sound far quieter and far heavier. A single Terran broadcast cutting through every signal. This is humanity. You know what you did. Choose your side carefully. That single sentence played across an entire sector. No threats. No names. No ultimatums. Just the weight of a species that had already decided the outcome. Within hours, the world surrendered. Meanwhile, on Earth, the world remained strangely calm. No one was cheering in the streets. There were no fireworks, no victory speeches. People stood outside in silence, watching the stars. In schools, children learned the names of the fallen from Novus Colony. In homes, families whispered promises never to forget. Terran cities ran like clockwork, not because of excitement, but because every citizen already knew this war was not about glory, it was about justice. In Terran command beneath Europa's ice, Admiral Rourke watched his officers move like a single living machine. They didn't celebrate their victories. They simply prepared for the next step. "Report," he said. A young intelligence officer straightened her shoulders. "Council core fleets are broken. Remaining ships are scattered. Their central chain of command has been disabled. Border colonies are surrendering without contact." Rourke's jaw tightened. "And the Council itself?" "They are sending peace envoys," the officer replied. "Desperate ones. Some worlds are begging for negotiations. Others are trying to offer territory in exchange for mercy." He stared at the map, galactic sectors glowing blue where once the Council had ruled. He had seen wars before. Wars filled with noise, with armies throwing themselves at each other. But this wasn't war. This was precision. A single, unstoppable current sweeping everything aside. "No negotiations," he said finally, voice calm. "We're not here to take their worlds. We're here to make sure they never do this again." Far from the front lines, alien worlds were beginning to fracture. Some populations rebelled against their own governments for dragging them into a war they couldn't win. Others burned Council flags in the streets, fearing Terran retaliation. On a communications relay station orbiting a Council world, a technician stared at the data feed pouring in. "We've lost contact with entire sectors," he whispered. His commander didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. At the same time, Terran infiltration teams struck deep behind the remaining strongholds. Elite units operated without broadcasting their positions, disabling communication hubs, erasing strategic outposts, and ensuring that every remaining piece of the Council war machine fell apart from the inside. The galaxy wasn't watching a fight. It was watching an empire collapse in silence. On one Council fortress world, the ruling governor stepped out onto a balcony to address a terrified population. Behind him, the night sky was filled with distant blue lights, the engines of the Terran fleet. He tried to sound strong, but his voice cracked. We will resist," he lied. His people didn't believe him. Hours later, the same governor sent a transmission to the Terran fleet. One sentence. "We surrender." Back on Earth, the people received the news with the same heavy silence. For them, surrender wasn't victory. Victory would have been those billion lives never being lost in the first place. Victory would have been the Council never crossing that line. This wasn't triumph. This was the cost of reminding the galaxy what happens when humanity is wronged. In the Council chamber, the Chancellor shouted over the chaos, "They won't stop. They're not after territory. What do they want?" But deep down, he already knew the answer. Humanity didn't want their planets. Humanity didn't want their riches. Humanity wanted the one thing the Council could never give back, what they took on Novus. Across the stars, fleets that had once worn the Council's insignia now floated adrift. Worlds that had once sworn loyalty now trembled in silence. The Terran fleet was not chasing glory. It was simply finishing what had already begun the moment the first colony died. Admiral Rourke looked out at the fleet map one more time. Every movement was precise. Every strike was sharp. "This isn't revenge," he said quietly to his officers. "This is the line being drawn." His words hung in the air like steel. The galaxy would remember them for generations. By now, no one dared to believe the Council could survive this. And more terrifying than humanity's weapons was their silence. No cheering. No boasts. No mercy. Just the steady, unstoppable reminder of what happens when they are forced to show their true face. In the void between stars, the Black Fleet hovered like a shadow that would never fade. Alien worlds whispered its name with fear, and one by one, they knelt. Not because they were forced, but because they understood. This was not a war they could win. This was judgment. And judgment had already arrived. The great chamber of the Galactic Council, once the proud heart of power for hundreds of alien species, now felt like a tomb. The walls that once echoed with sharp speeches, political games, and the laughter of those who thought themselves untouchable were silent. Banners that had hung for centuries hung limp, shadows of their former pride. The once brilliant star map at the center of the hall now flickered weakly, a fractured ghost of a galaxy that no longer belonged to them. What used to be a chamber of command had become a room of fear. Outside, scattered across the void like black thunderheads, Terran warships waited. No sound, no movement, just an ocean of power, cold, steady, and unstoppable. The Chancellor stood alone at the center of the council table, hands trembling as reports flashed before his eyes. Fleet losses, border collapses, world after world switching sides or surrendering before a single shot was fired. The might of the Council had shattered without ever truly clashing against humanity. This wasn't war as they knew it. This was something older, colder, an execution. Around him, ambassadors shifted nervously in their seats, their scales, feathers, and hides all slick with fear. Even the most arrogant among them now avoided each other's gaze. No one wanted to speak the truth out loud. Humanity had won. And it hadn't even needed to roar. Beyond the station's great windows, the black silhouettes of Terran dreadnoughts blotted out the stars. They didn't come to negotiate. They didn't come to boast. They came to end this on their own terms. Terran ships didn't swarm or circle like vultures. They stood like sentinels, each one positioned with surgical precision. They had already proven they could burn everything down. Now they were proving something even more terrifying. They didn't need to. The chamber doors hissed open. Every ambassador turned at once, their movements stiff and fearful. The sound of boots echoed across the floor, slow, controlled, deliberate. A single human envoy entered, wearing a black uniform with a single red emblem on his chest. No guards followed him. No escorts. Just one man, walking into the hall of a broken empire as if he owned it. And in that moment, he did. The Chancellor's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Why are you here?" It was not the voice of a leader anymore. It was the voice of someone who already knew the answer but needed to hear it anyway. The envoy didn't rush to respond. He walked to the center of the chamber, placed a black case on the glowing table, and pressed it open with one hand. Inside, a single shard of crystalline glass gleamed under the weak light. The moment he activated it, a massive hologram filled the room. It was not a fleet. It was not a threat. It was a name. Novus. And below the name, in sharp, unwavering red letters, 1 billion dead. Never forgotten. Every alien in the room flinched. Not because of the display itself, but because of what it meant. Humanity had not come for conquest. They had come to remind the Council of the one thing the galaxy had hoped would fade with time. But Earth did not forget. It never forgot. The envoy's voice was quiet, steady, and colder than the void outside. "You believed we would forgive," he said. "You believed the word regrettable would be enough to bury 1 billion lives. You believed treaties would protect you. You were wrong." The Chancellor gripped the edge of the table. "What do you want?" he whispered. It wasn't a demand. It was a plea. The envoy raised his eyes to meet the room. "We don't want your worlds. We don't want your riches. We don't want your council." His words hit the air like iron. "We want your memory. And your silence." Gasps rippled through the room. One ambassador slammed a clawed fist on the table. "You can't control the council forever," he shouted. The envoy tilted his head slightly, not in anger, but in quiet, terrifying amusement. "Control you," he said softly. "We don't need to. You'll control yourselves now." He pressed another button on the shard. The star map above the table shifted, showing the Terran border in bright red. Unlike before, this time the line pulsed, alive, stretching like a wall across the galaxy. "This line," the envoy said, "will never be crossed again. Not by you. Not by anyone. You step across it, and you won't just lose your fleets. You'll lose everything." Outside, the Terran fleet moved, not forward, but in perfect, silent alignment. Every dreadnought rotated just slightly, their weapons shifting to face the Council station. No threats were spoken, but no one in that room doubted what those ships could do. The Chancellor fell back into his chair, sweat glistening on his brow. The realization hit him like a blade. Humanity had remade the Galactic Order not through conquest, but through fear. Through silence. Through the certainty that if anyone crossed that line again, the stars themselves would burn. The envoy took the shard and closed the case. He didn't bow. He didn't shake hands. He didn't even glance back. He simply turned and began to walk toward the door. His steps echoed louder than any speech the Council had ever given. The ambassadors sat frozen in their seats, watching him leave, knowing this was not a negotiation. It was a sentence. When the doors shut behind him, the Chancellor let out a slow, shaking breath. One of his advisors whispered, "We should resist. We must resist." But the Chancellor's voice was nothing more than a broken whisper. Resist. He turned to the star map, to the sea of Terran warships. Against that. Across the galaxy, the Council's message went out, not of resistance, but of surrender. One by one, systems signed the non-aggression pact, vowing never to set foot beyond the Terran border again. It wasn't forced. It was survival. Back on Earth, there was no celebration. There never was. The war wasn't fought for glory. It was fought for Novus, for the voices that were silenced without warning. Families gathered at memorial walls, tracing their fingers over the etched names of the lost. There were no parades. Only a quiet, unshakable vow. Humanity would never allow this again. On the outer rim, the Black Fleet remained deployed, not to invade, not to conquer, but to watch. Every sensor, every ship, every weapon stayed ready. It was not a threat. It was a promise. Humanity didn't roar. Humanity waited. And the galaxy would forever live with the knowledge that beneath the stars, behind the quiet blue glow of Terran engines, lay something far more dangerous than hatred. It was memory, and it never forgot. The Council had believed humanity would forgive genocide. They were wrong. Humanity had shown its true face, not the face that smiled in diplomatic chambers, but the one that had endured its own darkest history. The one that didn't threaten. It simply remembered. And when pushed past the line, it didn't shout. It whispered. And the galaxy bowed.